You know the vibes. Welcome back to another episode of the Hoop Genius podcast, brought to you by NBA 2K24. I'm Mo Mootsie, and alongside me once again for the second day in a row is General Manager Extraordinaire, Mr. Scott Perry. Scotty P, how you doing?
Man, I'm doing great, Mo. It's good to hear that. You know the vibes again. It sounds back to normal now. It took you a couple times after that Celtics win, but it's back.
I'm
It's
just trying to get
back.
my voice back. I'm trying to get my
Exactly.
voice back, get my energy back. I'm feeling good.
Yeah,
I spent
yeah.
today, I spent some time out in the park. I was playing basketball with my friends. One of my homies from LA
Oh,
came to
really?
London. So I was showing him
Well,
how we
did you
get
win? I
down
want
over
to
here.
know. Did you win? That's all I need to know.
Scott, here's one thing you should know.
Okay.
All we do is win.
Win.
If I'm losing, I ain't playing.
Okay. All
And here's the thing. Here's the thing.
right.
If I ever lose, we have to run it back until I win. You know what I'm
I
saying? Like I
understand.
ain't, I ain't losing and going home. Never.
Hey, been there, done that before.
Hell yeah.
Exactly.
Hell yeah.
One more time.
Yeah, but run it
we,
back.
used,
No,
we,
run it
we
back.
used to have a saying, you're only good as your last game. So
That's
you
a
had to win
fact.
that last game.
That's a fact. Can't be going home a loser. I don't care if the lights go off. It's pitch black outside. We running it back. I don't care.
Exactly. Exactly.
So Scott, coming up very soon is the NBA
Mhm.
draft. How are you feeling? Because this is usually a very stressful time of the year for you. Now
Yeah.
you're chilling. I
Right.
won't tell everyone where you are, but you're chilling in some good weather. You got some
Exactly.
sunshine hitting you and no stress. How's that feel?
Well, I'm enjoying that part a little bit, Mo. Just not having that stress, being on the phone uh, for the past month, up to midnight, 1, 2 a.m. in the morning, because it's a lot is going on around this time of year. So I understand what my peers and brethren are going through right now. It's a true culmination of a year's long worth of work from so many people in your organization. But it's also an exciting time. I do miss a little bit of that adrenaline rush that you do get around this time, because hey, this is one of the most important times for your franchise, because now you're getting to add some talent and to hopefully improve your organization.
The stars of tomorrow today. That's the tagline
That's
they
it.
have, right? So before we get into talking about the draft and some of these prospects, Scott, I wanted to take this chance to go inside the world of an NBA executive. And I feel like there's no one better in the world to take us through that journey. What does it look like for you as an NBA executive when you're with an NBA team, as a general manager, as a president, and so on and so forth? When you start thinking about the draft, is that a year in advance? Is it 2, 3 years? When do you first start tracking players to keep your eye on?
Well, you're tracking players as soon as they come to mind for you. I mean, whether it's 1, 2, 3, or 5 years out, it just depends on when a particular player shows up. I mean, use an example like Victor Wembanyama. You heard about him years ago. You were paying attention to him, even though the draft wasn't going to be until 2023, but you started following him then. But just to kind of give our listeners an understanding, let's just take a year and what goes into the preparation for tomorrow, tonight's draft. Coming into training camp, or really coming out of the summer, your scouts have been out watching a lot of players, from the previous year who've been back. A lot of guys have participated in these shoe company camps, a lot of the top players, or they may be in some summer leagues or whatever the case may be. So you're following them then, you come back, you come to training camp, and you start plotting out meetings throughout the year, and then a draft specific meetings, and you're breaking it up amongst your scouting staff. Guys are going to be covering the globe. You're obviously covering a lot of college basketball here in the States, but as you well know, Mo, over in Europe, it is basketball all the time, and you got to have, we have international scouts that are there all the time, and then some of you guys stateside, you got to plan for them to be able to go over there, and you yourself as a general manager, you want to go over there and put your eyes on any of the top prospects. So the whole year you're using that process to start narrowing things down. And as your team is performing on the court, you start to get an idea of where you may end up drafting. If you're on a really good playoff team, more than likely you're still responsible for knowing everybody in the draft, but you're going to really start honing in on guys that you're projecting that will be maybe 20 to 30 if you're a real good playoff team. And so you really start to hone in on those guys a couple months, leading up to the actual draft, because that's going to be your spot. Or if you're going to be a lottery team and you know that early in the year, you're following all the top prospects. And so you're doing all that to be prepared for this night. And I can't tell you how many meetings you're having, and you're talking to every team in the league, not just yourself as GMs. You're breaking that up amongst your staff, getting as much intel as you can. You got workouts. I didn't even bring that up. You want to start meeting these guys, which is a big important thing for me, because you can do all the film study and all of the in-person watching of players. But to me, the biggest component of the whole process is getting to sit face to face with a lot of these guys and know who they are as people, whether that is at the NBA draft combine or whether it's when they come see you. And then when draft night comes, I like this last thing, and I know I'm going a little long, but when draft night comes, but when draft night comes, I like to liken it as a GM. You're like a juggler at a circus. You see the jugglers that have all these balls going up at once, because now the information is coming real time. Your preparation leading up to that night is really key, because it allows you to juggle a little easier. But you're getting calls from teams, you're getting calls from agents, you're getting calls from media people, and you're trying, seeing how the draft board is falling, and hopefully it's falling in your favor. And I will say this, I know a lot of the fans like to hear and see trades on draft night. Very difficult to get a trade on draft night if you haven't been having conversations leading up to draft night, especially in the first round. I'm not saying it's not possible, but it is difficult because it's a lot of moving parts. So usually when I would go into a draft, we knew the pool of guys that we really were looking at that we thought would be there at our pick. We knew the conversations that we had that, okay, we would move off of this pick if if we were able to push through this trade or not, or if we would just want to just sit pat. Having a plan going on is huge, and sticking to that plan. And every now and then you got to be prepared for a call that you didn't expect, because you can't possibly know everybody's board. Somebody may decide that they don't want their pick and want to move back and offer you an opportunity to move up, and that way you can assure to get the top guy on your board. So, just is so much that's going on that night, but preparedness is the big thing. And I was always big into being prepared. So I never felt anxious on draft night, because we had met so much, organized our information. Being organized is huge in the draft process. And then you got everybody in the room with you. You got all your scouts there. You got all your cap people, your entire, coaches around. So depending on how large your staff is, you might have 40, 50 people in your draft area. And so
they call it the war room on
the
draft
war room.
night,
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, they call
and
it
Scott,
the war room.
I want you to take us inside the war room, right? And I'm going to give you a scenario, and I want you to tell me how you react to this.
Okay.
Let's say you have a top 10. Let's say you got the number 5 pick, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're on the board, so you've got 5 minutes to announce your selection.
Mm-hmm.
You get a call come in, and a team is offering you the number 10 pick, but a very good player that's already on their roster as well.
Mm-hmm.
You have less than 5 minutes to make that decision. What's that process like? Is it you're taking an executive decision as the leader of the group, or the owner of the team has an input, or you run some sort of spreadsheet with the numbers to see, because you've got less than 5 minutes to make this call?
Right. Yeah.
So what's the game plan?
Well, a lot of that would have to depend just on how married you are to drafting at number 5. If there's a player that you really like, that you really want to get, especially having him on a rookie scale contract, you'd be hard pressed to move back. When you talk about moving back, you better like somebody at 10, as well as getting. I know you told me there would be a good player. Now I don't, we don't know what player we're discussing here right now. So, but you better really not only like that player they're sending you, but you better also like the player which you're moving back to get at 10 as well. And you would do that. That's why a lot of times I would tier. Going into the draft, we would tier the draft. And what I mean by tier, so like last year again, I'll use Wembanyama as an example. He was his own tier, so he was the top tier. And then maybe in the next tier there were 4 or 5 other guys. So, and you rank them within the tier, but you'd be comfortable with taking anybody in that tier.
Yeah.
So if I'm moving back to 10. If I've got somebody, if I've got 5 through 10 in no particular order, but they're all in the same tier, I may feel more compelled to do that.
Yeah.
To move back to do that. But if it's a clear separation, now I'm less inclined to do that, that kind of move. But you're empowered to make those kind of decisions. That's why you're being hired to do that. A lot of times owners are there and around, and you just have to be prepared to give them a quick snapshot on why we should do this or why we shouldn't do this if it came through.
And then how much do you trust what other GMs are saying? For example, when the Celtics drafted Jason Tatum, they had the number 1 pick in the draft, but they traded back to the number 3 spot in order to receive an additional pick from the Philadelphia 76ers, who then moved up and took Markelle Fultz. The Lakers took Lonzo Ball. Now, how much do you trust in what the opposing GMs are telling you, the player that they'll pick at that spot? Because if you're the Celtics and you want Jason Tatum, you could have had him with the number 1 pick. And if the Sixers are telling you they want Fultz and the Lakers are saying that they want Lonzo Ball, how much do you take their word for it?
A lot of that has to depend on just what your relationship is with like that particular GM, to be quite frank with you. Look, when you're in this, it's a small group. So you like to think in that situation, when you're talking moving up and back, that there has to be a moment of transparency and truth from the other side that you can trust. Because if that guy doesn't do what he's telling you he's going to do, now they may need you at another time or whatever the case may be, and now they can't come to you for the same type of business anymore because they've breached that trust. Now, there's a lot of misinformation maybe leading up to the, during the draft process.
Like that draft, everyone assumed the Celtics would take
everybody, exactly. But I'm saying, but before you pull the trigger, assuming that obviously the Tatum was their guy that they knew they could move back to get, they had to know at least for sure that, and felt comfortable that Philly was not going to take him. And they probably had some indication, not that the number 2 team, I think it was the Lakers in that example, that was Lonzo Ball, but they probably had enough intel where they felt comfortable that it probably was going to be Lonzo Ball. And that's where you also working with the agent as well too. The agent I'm sure wanted Jason in Boston, to great fit, and whatever information he had, sure he would share with a Danny Ainge and said, hey, you don't have to worry about the Lakers. We didn't go work out there, it didn't work well. They told us they're not taking him, whatever the case may be. And so you juggle that information that way.
I've got one last question, and I appreciate you giving us all this knowledge. My final question is this, Scott. At what point does the GM or someone else inside that war room text Adrian Wojnarowski or Shams Charania to leak the pick before it's announced on TV? Because every year they ruin the draft by tweeting out who gets picked before it's actually announced, right? Now, I don't know why they do this, because it's literally a 30-second difference, right? Maybe it's an ego thing to be ahead of the curve. But number one, who is telling them this information? And number two, why?
Yeah.
See, we really expose the industry on this episode.
Exactly. You asking a difficult question. I can talk for sure from my perspective. And then one of the things that I was very transparent and know both of those guys. Obviously, Woj is a colleague of mine. He does a terrific job. But it wasn't never my job, in my opinion, to notify them before I notify the league office, number one, who we're taking, and notify the agent of the player that we're getting ready to draft them. Now, a lot of times, once you've notified the agent, sometimes the agents are letting these guys know. And you never know. There could be people within your organization. Look, these guys get Woj and Shams and these guys, they have done a terrific job of getting to know a lot more people than just the general managers and presidents on the team too. And so when they have a lot of sources that they can go to get this information quick. And I guess, and we live in a society today that being first on these news cycles means more a lot of times than being right or accurate. So they have the pressure, and I get it. They have their jobs. They're under the gun. That's what they're paid to do, is be first with information like this. So it's really changed a lot from the time I started in the NBA, because when I first started in the NBA, you didn't, back in 2000, quite frankly, we didn't really have that to that degree. There would be a lot of times when you hear the pick on television or see the pick on television, it was like, well, wow, we didn't, it was a surprise.
Yeah, I think that was
now you know it. A lot of times a pick or two in advance who's getting ready to get picked. So
yep. Hey. They've probably got a cleaning staff on the payroll. They've
exactly.
up in the corner listening into the conversations, send a little text. Yeah. I mean, it is what it is. But I appreciate that insight, Scott. That's really interesting. I'm sure our listeners appreciate that insight into the world of being an executive in the NBA. So let's talk about this year's draft. A draft that a lot of people are saying is a weak draft class. They're saying it's the weakest draft class since 2020. I don't know if I believe in weak draft classes. The reason being, and you and I have spoken about this off the show, is it's more to do with the fit of where the player lands than their reputation coming into the draft. Because you just got to look at how many players who are picked in the second round or in the late first round or outside the lottery who have gone on to become finals MVPs and all-stars in this league and defensive player of the years in this league. So it's like, okay, you're saying it's a weak draft, but it could be a really strong draft. And a man from Serbia who's drafted during a commercial break can come in and become a multiple-time MVP. So, exactly. so it's like, well, I don't like that term of a weak draft. For me, that just means, a lot of these guys don't know what they're looking at.
But a couple,
go ahead.
I was going to say, a couple of things come to mind when you bring that, and this is why, Mo, one day you're gonna go from podcast to the GM. This is a great question and great observation by you. A couple things come to mind. I agree with you when people say, "Oh, this is a weak draft," like there's no players in the draft. There's always going to be some guys who can play this game, and if they get in the right situation, they will, they will reach their full potential and become very good NBA players. And more than likely, somebody out of this class, or maybe a handful, will end up becoming an all-star. I can go back to 2013 when I was in Orlando, when everybody was talking about that was a draft that was, quote unquote, a weak draft, and it wasn't that's strong of a draft. But in that draft, number 14 was Giannis Antetokounmpo.
Yep.
Number 27 was Rudy Gobert.
Yep.
And so when you
hear that, we picked Oladipo, and if he stayed injury free, he was
free, and he was a very good player, no question. And obviously, Vic was, and Vic, I believe, became an all-star one year.
He did. He was having that run where he was on a trajectory to being in some All-NBA, maybe MVP conversations.
I think when you hear this narrative, and some of it comes from the league itself, but a lot of it comes from the media world as well. There's no one player or two players or three players that have separated themselves at this point to a great degree. So like last year, you never would have heard it was a weak draft, because Victor Wembanyama was sitting at the top,
Hmm.
and the projection on him was to be a phenomenal player. If you go back to '03 when LeBron James was coming out, whenever you have these, or when Dwight Howard was the top with pick, Shaq years ago, you can just go down the line. When you have one, two, or three players who have established themselves at an earlier age as elite, then everybody talks about how strong the draft is. Doesn't necessarily mean those drafts are always deep. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. I think in this draft that you're going to be able to find players, and this is where it's important that you know your own culture, who you are, how you're trying to play, and then knowing which one of these guys you can bring in that could fit to be a good player. See, sometimes in the draft, you just want to be able to hit singles and doubles.
Yep.
You're not going to always hit home runs. What you don't want to do is strike out.
Yep.
And so, especially in a draft like this, go on and hit you a single or double. And if that single or double turns out to be a triple or inside the park home run, oh, fantastic. Great for us.
I think as well, like everyone expects everyone to become a superstar. Like I remember
Yes.
that draft you're talking about where Giannis went at 14. I remember the Celtics at 13 picked Kelly Olynyk, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
And listening to Danny Ainge after that draft, he said Kelly's going to be a very solid role player for us, which I thought at the time, I was young. I thought that's crazy. You're supposed to tell this guy's going to be a star, but
Right.
I recognize that you've drafted for a need on your team, a stretch big. That's a hard quantity to get at that time in the NBA. And he ended up being a very solid role player. And he, in fact, ended up winning them that game 7 against the Wizards in the playoffs one year. So it's like, yeah, you hit a single, but that one game in Washington in game 7, that turned out to be a home run. So it's an interesting, how everyone perceives the draft. And as well, like people said 2020 was a weak draft. Anthony Edwards, Tyrese Halliburton, Tyrese Maxey, LaMelo Ball. Like, what are we doing here? So with this year's so-called weak draft, right? I'm going to give you another scenario, Scott. In fact, I'll give us both a scenario. Let's say you're the GM and I'm the assistant GM. And we work for the Atlanta Hawks. And we have the number 1 pick in the draft. But we're in a unique situation because just a few years ago, we were in the conference finals. We got a player in Trae Young who's made all-star teams and is one of the best offensive players in the NBA. You've got an interesting mix of other players on the roster, even though they might not fit perfectly. What are you doing with that number 1 pick? Are you selecting someone with it? Or are you looking to move that and maybe package that with some salary to get an upgrade to your current roster? What would you do if you were the Hawks right now?
Well, I'm exploring all those options that you talked about because there's not at the moment, and you see somebody I'm saying, okay, this guy's going to come in. I feel confident he's going to be an NBA star. There's nobody at the top of the draft that I'm right now. I can say that. I see some guys I think that are going to be good players. But the problem is the rest of the league is probably looking at it very similar. So how many teams in this draft are saying we want the number 1 pick and we're willing to give up a lot to trade up to get number 1? But you still have to go through the process of trying to see if there is somebody, because you never know if there is a team that would be interested. But assuming that you can't get a deal done, you obviously have to draft a pick. And if you can't, move back a couple spots to maybe to pick up multiple picks, pick up a lower pick this year. Like I say, if you wanted to move back to 3 or 4, I know San Antonio's at 4 and 8. Could you entice them? Do they want somebody bad enough at 1 where you could just get 4 and 8 for 1? Because you need extra help. That's a thought that you could go into it with. But saying all that, we've got the pick. You and I have the pick. And to my earlier point, we got to draft somebody that's not going to fail. So I'm looking at players, and I'm big on this, Mo, guys that have won.
Winners.
Where they've been. And so you got 2 guys in this draft, both from UConn. One was on the team when he won back-to-back championships, and Donovan Clingan. It's been amazing to watch his rise because I remember he was a big man that was coming off the bench. at
Hmm.
UConn, and he has improved every year. And you know he's going to be able to do two things. He's going to be able to protect the rim at a high level. He's going to be able to catch, screen and roll to the basket, catch lobs, and be a presence. Will it be a star the way the game's being played right now? That remains to be seen. He'd have to make some greater leaps. But then his other teammate, Stefan Castle, young player, excellent defender. I think he's another guy I don't think will fail. He contributed to winning. He's played a little point guard in high school, so he's going to be able to play a few positions on the perimeter, I believe, in the NBA. And he's got a winning pedigree, And so when you look at the Hawks as an organization, who was a few years ago, yeah, they did make it to the conference finals, but they haven't been that as of late.
It was a fluke. I will
Yeah,
say it. No one else
exactly.
wants to say it.
And you need some stability. You need guys in that locker room. We're talking about culture guys that are going to help you win, and they can really, start developing a fabric for your team. So I don't, I know there's a lot of talk about both the guys from France.
Yep.
And I've watched his Alex Sarr. And he's a big man, he's athletic, but
this is something I wanted to talk to you about as well. Yeah. Alex Sarr refused to work out with the Atlanta Hawks because he sees himself more as a four and he wants a bigger offensive role, and he doesn't think that Atlanta is going to give him the place to play the game how he wants. Stefan Castle also refused to work out with teams who have point guards already in place. So he views himself as a point guard. Now, with Trae Young already on the roster, would you take your chances in drafting a Sarr who refused to work out for you, or a Castle who doesn't want to go to a team with a point guard already established, and try and convince them that they can fit within your team? Or would you go for the safe bet in someone like Donovan Clingan, who fills a gap in your team and allows you then to move some of the rest of your roster?
Again, we talked about assessing the draft here earlier in our conversation, Mo. If this was Victor Wembanyama telling me he didn't want to come in and work out for number one, I'm still drafting him number one, and we'll figure it out.
Yep.
We'll figure it out.
When you come in, you can trade
exactly. Yeah, we're gonna get you to learn to like it.
Yep.
Like Atlanta, but in this case, with these guys, again, potentially good players. Now, I don't know how Atlanta has their board. Now, if they see Alex Sarr as head and shoulders above everybody else in the draft, okay, then maybe they go for it. But if they don't, then me personally, why even wrestle with somebody who doesn't want to be in your program, be in your organization? Because you're starting off on the wrong foot. So a lot of that, I'd have to know what that really was right now, and what the actual case, why he doesn't want to be there, and all those kind of things. But at the end of the day, you have the power to draft those guys, and they're going to have to come join your team. They want to play in the NBA.
The Hawks defied the odds by getting this number one pick. And it's given them a unique chance where they could actually rebuild their team and get significant value back from DeJounte Murray and Trae Young if they were to move them. How tempted would you be to do that? Because I don't know how the mix is going to work by having someone like Trae Young, who's a very offense-heavy point guard, and then trying to bring in a rookie who, if you do draft them with the number one pick, there will be the human element of the ego of, well, I was the number one pick in the draft. I got to get my 20 shots. I want the ball here. I want this and that. Whereas if it's Trae Young's team, how tempted would you be to actually move on from Trae and just start a whole rebuild in Atlanta?
Well, it's that whole idea about starting a rebuild. Again, that's a tough thing to do, because if you signing up to say we're not going to win for 4 or 5 years, that may last a decade or a decade and a half. And we've seen that with a number of teams that have gone down that path. What I would do, independent of the draft, and I'm sure that they did this in Atlanta, is assess their guard situation. They have not been able to win with those guys together, DeJounte Murray, Trae Young, consistently. In my view, you got to make a decision on which one you really want to move forward with, because they both have value around the league.
Mm-hmm.
And then whichever one you decide you want to keep, then you go out and get the best deal for the other one to help build around that guard that you're keeping. That's how I would look at that situation. And I wouldn't be influenced by, like I said, the draft pick saying, oh, I don't want to come here because you already got, a couple guards there. Because they don't know what you're getting ready to do with your roster anyway. You know what I'm saying? So that can change in a hurry. But I would be surprised if Atlanta hasn't, look, they've been watching these guys for a couple of years together. They haven't gone anywhere.
Yep.
So now you've got to make that decision while they both still have good value. They're both younger players. Trae Young has been an all-star. DeJounte Murray has more size and is the better two-way player. So they got to decide which one they want to move on from, in my opinion, and hopefully get back a couple players maybe, or a player and another draft pick, so that now that they can move forward and hopefully improve their team.
So I think, talking about hitting singles or filling a need in your team earlier, I think the number one pick for the Hawks this year could be Zachary Risaka, if that's how you pronounce it.
Mm-hmm.
The other kid from France, because he can shoot the ball really well off the wing.
Mm-hmm.
He's got long arms, can play solid defense, and he can acclimatize to playing that NBA style of defense. Do you think how much pressure is on the GM of a team with the number one pick? Because if that player doesn't transpire to be a superstar and he just becomes a role player, the narrative in the media and amongst fans is he's a quote unquote bust.
Yes, that's anytime. And I've never been fortunate enough to have the number one pick, or unfortunate enough.
You always want a second pick, because no one's mad at the second pick.
Exactly. Yeah. But you're right. There is a lot of external noise and outside pressure that comes, again, especially in a draft like this one. Again, there is no Victor Wembanyama. So, see, when those times you go to the lottery and it's clear cut who the number one pick is to everybody, okay, you're sitting there hoping, okay, we win the lottery, the pick is already in, it's done. Unless you discover something that was just egregious that nobody knew about the guy's character or personality, you win and you go ahead and take that player. This one here, to me, it's going to get down to how comfortable you are with the person. And can that player, you got to understand this, when the player comes in as a number one pick, he's wearing that pressure on his shoulder too. It's not just the GM.
Yep.
That player is, because, and if it doesn't work out for the players that, if the players doesn't play well early, you worry about him losing his confidence, people calling him a bust, and all of these things. And now he's got to fight through that. So there's a lot that goes into this, Mo.
Absolutely. Who are some of the players that are catching your eye or intrigue you? Because you've got a track record of being pretty good at drafting some of these guys, pretty good scouting eye. There's a few players on the top of my mind. I think Isaiah Collier, who's working with our good friend, Mr. BJ Armstrong, he intrigues me a lot. And I think he can be a lot better than what people have seen from him last season at USC in the right situation. I think Zach Edey as well is a player that really fascinates me, given his size and his ability to score on the inside, and also block shots as well. And I think if he's still on the board when OKC picks, I think they've got the 12th pick. I think that will be really interesting to see if they pair him with Chet Holmgren. I think that will address a lot of the things for them. And then, there's other guys like Nikola Topic, who he had some sort of injury to his knee. I can't remember exactly what injury it was, but before that, he was projected a lot higher. But who are some of the guys that are catching your eye and you think, regardless of where they're drafted, are going to be ones to watch from this year's class?
Interesting names. You mentioned Collier. Like Collier, he's one of the top high school players when he was coming out. Didn't have the kind of year at USC that he was predicted to have, but talented young player. So again, getting to the right place will be important for him. But his teammate, I mentioned Stefan Castle. I'm intrigued by him because he impacted winning. He's got good size. He's got good toughness. And I categorize him as what I would call a winning player. Really interesting to see what happens with Ron Holland,
Mm.
who was another one of the top high school players
Because
here in the
I've seen
state.
some people say
And,
he should be the number one
yeah,
pick.
and was at G League Ignite because he's super athlete and he plays really hard. Just needs a lot of skill development. And so going to the right place for him, if he gets that necessary skill development and he puts forth the effort to do that, you may find somebody that, in him that becomes a good player. And the one kid from France that no one's talking about, who I've watched a lot on film, is this kid, Tijane Saloon, I believe I may be mispronouncing his first name, but Saloon is his last name. But he's 6'10", 6'11", excellent body, athletic, a little on the raw side, but he's got toughness. And I could see a player like him end up being the best one out of this draft from France if he gets in the right situation.
He's pretty raw
based on
as
the
a
physical
prospect,
tools.
but he's got the tools to develop.
He's a raw prospect athlete, but he's got some of the toughness when I've watched him on film that I really like. And so it'll be interesting to watch him moving forward. I talked about Clingan a little bit, and I also like to see the kid at Tennessee too, Dalton Connect. He's older. We draft everybody high in the draft. He's got to be 18, 19 years old, So now he's considered a gray beard because he's 22, 23 years old, been around.
That makes me feel older though.
Yeah, exactly. But he's more of a finished product. He's going to be able to shoot the basketball. He's more athletic than you think. Will be interesting to see what type of career he has. But I liked him this year.
And I think teams shouldn't be afraid of drafting an older prospect. You saw what Miami did last year, drafting Jaime Jaquez, who was a bit of an older player with more experience. And those players can often contribute highly immediately upon coming into the league. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all unfolds. I'm hoping there's going to be some trades and a few things that go on draft night. What's your take on the draft being split over 2 nights now, the first round and the second round?
Well, I was involved in some of the general managers meetings, going back a couple of years ago when this suggestion was brought up. And I like the idea, so I can't speak to experience of it because I never experienced the second day, but I could, I obviously experienced, 23 years of the second round coming right after the first round. And it was like speed dating. I mean, things move so fast. And you really don't have time to do much of anything. There's so much is coming at you in that second round. Do you want to sell the pick? Do you want to buy the pick? Is your guy willing to go to the G League? All this stuff is going on, and you can see a lot of mistakes that are made. So a lot of, obviously, in the league, obviously ratified this, was in favor of, okay, let's make this a 2-day event. And now we can look at the second round, to your point earlier, look at the second round gems that came out of, we might be able to find more now, but you talk about Nikola Jokic, Draymond Green, guys, over the last decade that have been second round picks. Maybe you could find more. My last couple of years in New York, Miles McBride. So you can find good players in that second round, and I like the ability now for teams to go home at night, come back, have a little more time on the clock. Day 2, you might see some more, trades that happen that day. But I think you'll see even more well thought out picks coming in the second round. At least that's the hope, and that was the reasoning behind trying to push it to a second day, and gives you the NBA 2 days of draft coverage on television. The NFL money, and the NFL has done a terrific job of that because they've made it a 3-day event, and this travels around the country. So maybe that will be the next thing for the NBA to start hosting the draft, other cities to start hosting the drafts other than just in New York. So,
Interesting. Yeah, we're gonna see. Shout out to all the fans who do tune in for that second round in what's apparently a weak draft, because that's gonna show you who a
exactly.
real
Oh
NBA
yeah.
fan is.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
But Scott, I appreciate you taking us inside the mind of a general manager for this episode and the NBA draft and all the insights you shared. Um, I'm excited. I'm looking forward to this. If you guys are listening, let us know in the Discord server. You can join our community through the link, and we're going to be there on draft night talking through picks and trades and all that's going on. So make sure you get involved and subscribe to the show while you're here. YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcast from. Scotty P will be back before you know it. Don't worry. While BJ is handling business over in New York, and
Yes.
keep an eye out for him. You might see him pop up on your TV screen on draft night. You never know.
Yeah.
Scott, man, I appreciate you, brother. I appreciate you. Get some rest, because
Always, Mo.
those NBA drafts can drag on a little bit. So
Yes, they
we've just got
can,
one
but
round to deal with, but get some rest, and I'll see you very soon, my brother. Appreciate you. Until next time, get buckets.
Get buckets. All right.